What do you do when you want to control someone in power? Do you bribe them? Maybe. Make a threat against them and their family? That could work. What if the person you're trying to control has so much money and protection that bribes and threats wouldn't even scratch the surface of getting his attention? Maybe you go another route. You do some digging and discover that the person you're after likes to party, loves to cheat on his wife, and doesn't shy away from the devil's powder behind closed doors. So, you invite this person to a party, and then around midnight, the boring people head out and the real party begins. The alcohol is now paired with the sniffing of substances. More young women and young men enter the extravagant atmosphere, and this person says to himself, "Wow, they look pretty young." But no one else seems to raise any alarm, so he goes along with it. One of these young women even puts her arm around this person, kisses him on the cheek, and puts her hand in his lap. Some of his peers start to leave the room with these younger guests, and this person realizes that he's the only one left. He panics, then leaves before things can take a darker turn, before he could be implicated in anything depraved. Or so he thought. On Monday, there's an envelope on this person's desk with a note inside that says, "I hope you'll go along with what we discussed." Behind the note, there's a photo with a young woman's hand around this person's shoulder and her other hand in his lap. On the edge of the photo, there's an arrow pointing to the girl with a date of birth, June 16th, 2009. However much power this person had 30 seconds ago, they are now totally compromised, totally controlled. Every breath he takes from this moment on is from air owned by another dark source who specializes in audiovisual blackmail. This time on The Zach Show, I sit down with investigative journalist Nick Bryant, who has dared to peer down the dark rabbit hole so deeply that he was the one who released Jeffrey Epstein's infamous Black Book back in 2015. Nick and I discuss what the Franklin scandal, the Epstein cover-up, and P. Diddy have in common in an episode that dives into the world of audiovisual blackmail of the most powerful people on the planet and the dark, malignant organizations who choreograph it from the shadows. Step out of the shadows and into the light with the investigative mind of Nick Bryant. Let's get into it. Well, Nick Bryant, thank you for coming on the show. And we were actually scheduled to do this a couple weeks ago, but you got sick a little bit, had a bit of a sore throat. Is someone trying to take you out? Have you finally dug too deep where you were in the line of fire?
No, I think it was just a nasty virus. Although it could have come from a lab in Wuhan. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm glad you recovered. I'm glad you're doing all right. I have a rough plan for this episode, which is I was tempted, like I was saying before we started recording, I was tempted to start straight with Diddy and Epstein because that is more of the current events. It's what's going on right now. And then as I was going back through the Franklin scandal, which is, of course, your book, there's so much detail, there's so much foundation laid in the Franklin scandal for what is going on today with Diddy and then Epstein a few years ago that I would feel like I was robbing the audience of necessary and, just quite honestly, like it sounds wrong to say about the Franklin scandal, but it just like fascinating, insightful, and just interesting things. Like it is a fascinating scandal that went on, and I feel like I would not be doing you a service and doing listeners a service if I didn't have you start with the Franklin scandal before we got into Diddy and Epstein.
So with the Franklin scandal, I was pitching an editor in New York stories, and he said, "Pitch me dark stories." And I kind of threw my hands up in the air. I said, "Nazis, Satanists. I mean, how dark do you want to go?" And he goes, "Satanists." So I had a simple plan. And when anybody starts out a story with, I had a simple plan, you know it's going to get convoluted. So I'm I'd met some Satanists. I was going to go to a black mass and then write an article, piece of cake. And when I was researching, as a writer, you're researching different tangents. And I
Mhm.
came across a cult called the Finders that was seemingly doing very bad things to children. And two of them got busted in Florida with 6 kids.
Mm.
And the they had a warehouse in Washington, D.C., and the Washington, D.C. police had called the Tallahassee police saying that we are interested in the Finders because of an unsolved murder. And then U.S. Customs got involved because I guess there was child pornography in the van. And ultimately, what happened was the D.C. police and U.S. Customs executed search warrants on the Finders warehouse.
Mm.
And they found there were pictures of nude kids. And then the Finders actually had like a little index file of families that advertised for babysitters.
Mm.
And a family would advertise for a babysitter and a finder would show up. And then the U.S. Customs, Ramon Martinez, the officer, he found a telex about the Finders buying a couple of children in Hong Kong.
Mm.
And this is very ominous stuff. And on the last page, I mean, we put the whole report in the Franklin scandal. So on the last page of that report, it says the CIA considers this an internal matter and there will be no more investigation into the Finders. And that blew me away because I kind of thought I knew how the world worked at
Yeah.
that point. I mean, if someone had said, you know how the world works, I thought, well, you know, I mean, I knew that the CIA fomented coups and I didn't know a lot about the mind control. I knew about the LSD side of it.
Mm.
So I was lacking in a lot of areas. And then I thought, well, you know, I've missed a paradigm here. I need to really look into this. So I started to dig into it. And there was a book and I'm not, I don't think it's a great book, but it's a book that kind of about something that happened in Nebraska. And then there was uh, a documentary called Conspiracy of Silence that was to be shown in on the Discovery Channel in the UK. And the plug got pulled on that. So I had a friend of mine, one of my best friends lives in Omaha, Nebraska.
Mm.
And I called him up and I said, dude, you know, let's hang out. I'm going to look into this story. I mean, I don't know if there's really much there, but, you know, we haven't hung out in a while, so let's hang out. And then I got to Nebraska, and then I started realizing I talked to a blackmail photographer, I talked to a victim, I talked to a lot of people, and people were frightened to
Mm.
talk about this. Very frightened. It was like I was doing an expose on the KGB and Stalinist Russia.
Yeah. Was your friend with you when you were going around to all these people, or did you just get to your friend's house, you put your stuff down, and you go, I got some things to do. I'll grab some dinner later, but I'm going to go, talk to some people first.
No, actually, we had dinner that night, and I kind of filled him in on
Okay.
exactly what I was there. But, you know, I knew that something had gone down in Nebraska. But there was innuendo that these kids were getting flown around the country, that it was connected to intelligence, that these pedophilic pimps were plundering Boys Town. So these things I had great difficulties with. But I studied philosophy in college. And the goal, at least how I see philosophy, Socrates talked a lot about this. Socrates has been trashed by Avstone, but I like old Sock. he said to approach everything agnostically.
Hmm.
And that's what I really try to do. I try to approach everything agnostically. Although I was skeptical about this, I kept my mind open. I thought, well, I'll investigate. And I did come across documents when I was in Nebraska. Actually, I got a leads list that had like 60 victims and a lot of other documentation. And then the fear was so palpable.
Hmm.
And the blackmail photographer, now here's a guy that takes compromising pictures of adults and children. And so he's not going to be the paragon of virtue or veracity. But he was telling me about it, and I thought he was telling me the truth. And then I talked to one of the victims whose story is way out there. But he also, I felt he was telling me the truth, or as much truth as he was aware of.
Hmm.
And then the Nebraska State Patrol, this was in 2002. I did not even have a cell phone at this point. If you can imagine living without a cell phone.
So, it's been a while, but I used to have the old LG flip phone.
Yeah. I mean,
which is basically without a cell phone nowadays, without a smartphone.
I would eventually get one of those, but I was still about 3 months away from that type of embracing that type of technology. Yeah. But the Nebraska State Patrol started to call my buddy's place.
Mm.
And my buddy's lived in Omaha most of his life, and he had some connections. And one of the guys, he had a friend who had a friend who was busted selling marijuana.
Mm.
Rather large quantities. And he was talking to his friend, and then the guy who was busted said that he had been part of that network, providing drugs, that he had been a courier, and he just broke down crying. So that really started to freak my friend out, and actually it started to freak me out.
Mm.
And then on my last night there, I was waiting for my friend to come home, and we were going to cook a dinner, and this freaky looking woman came. Now he's living in an apartment complex.
Yeah.
This freaky looking woman came to the door and said, "I want to give you a book." And at this point I was freaked out, and I did not want.
Did she say what book, or
no? She had a book, and she said, "I want to give you." I never. But at that point I was freaked out. I did not want my fingerprints on that book. And I did not want her fingerprints in my buddy's apartment.
Mm.
So I said, just go.
She seemed like she was going to do something violent, or...
No, she just seemed crazy. She wanted,
crazy. Okay.
And it was like she was programmed to give me the book. And I said, no, I don't want the book. Go away. But she was at the door for quite some time. And then then she leaves. And then my buddy comes. And he sees her in the lobby.
Yeah.
And I said to him, "Did you just see a really freaky looking woman with red hair?" And he goes, "Yeah, really, really freaky looking." And so he started to make dinner, and I was watching the History Channel.
Mm.
And lo and behold, she came back. And she started knocking on the door, wanting to give me the book again. And then he and I huddled, and I said, "Dirk, I don't know if I should have my, and I was getting freaked out at this point."
Yeah.
And I said, "I don't want her fingerprints in your apartment, and I don't want my fingerprints on that book. So I think that we should not let her into the apartment."
Mm.
And right before she left, she said, "You're in a great deal of danger, and they're going to kill you."
Did she seem like she had a different energy when she said that? Did she shift at all? Did she get clear? Or was it the same energy when she said, "They're coming for you"?
No, there was some gravitas when she said that to me.
Mm.
And then I came back to New York, and I had a mentor. His name was Gerald Ballinger. He was a retired journalist, writer. And I really loved him, and we would get together every Saturday and have breakfast. And we were walking through Washington Square Park, and I was really freaked out. I mean, I was looking for snipers, and I said, Jerry, it's all real, all of it, everything. It's all of it. It's much bigger and uglier and more malignant than I ever could have thought. And we sat down on a park bench, and he said, this is going to be dangerous. If you decide not to pursue it, I will understand that. I won't think anything less of you. And I said, they got away with, and when I say they, I'm talking about the government.
Yeah.
I said, they got away with destroying so many children. Nobody paid a price. And I'm just going to have to go for this. And I didn't have a wife at that point, and I didn't have any children.
Yeah.
Actually, I still don't have a wife, and I still don't have a children. But so I didn't have to worry about a family. And then I went for it. I spent the next 7 years of my life.
And that's what got you into the Franklin scandal, the entrance, that editor saying, find me something satanic. And then you come back from Omaha, you tell him the story of that creepy woman, all the shit you saw, and you goes, that's satanic enough for you. I think we're onto something here.
No, he said,
or Satanism. Didn't he say, like, I want something with Satanism?
Yeah. But, and then I showed him the Finder's document.
Yeah.
And I said, this is a huge story. And then he goes, well, Nick, why don't you just stick to what we'd originally talked about?
Yeah.
And at that point, I was really full tilt on this story. I was going to do this story.
Okay. So I want to take a step back a little bit, because I think we should give people an overview of what the Franklin scandal actually was, the major players, the location. We've already mentioned Omaha, the mechanisms, exactly what was going on with the Franklin scandal and the whole architecture of that thing, the thing that was in Franklin.
Okay, with the Franklin scandal, you had two primary pimps. One was Lawrence E. King in Omaha, and one was Craig Spence in Washington, D.C. King was the CEO of a credit union called the Franklin Credit Union, ergo the Franklin scandal. And Spence was a power broker and D.C. lobbyist. And
this is in Omaha, right? Franklin Credit Union, but in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the other pedophilic pimp was in Washington, D.C.
Okay. And that's Craig Spence.
So King and Spence flew these kids, and I ended up with a bunch of their passenger manifests, flew these kids to Washington, D.C. on a weekly basis. And Spence was a CIA asset, and his house was wired for audiovisual blackmail. And they would have these parties there. And now, a lot of the time, it was just guys that were already compromised. But if they did compromise someone, it would be a party. It would be like a Washington, D.C. type of cocktail party.
Socialites, high society.
Senators, representatives, people in the cabinet. I mean, everybody.
I'm sure celebrities too, actors, people like that.
Everybody. Upper echelon went to these parties. So at a certain point, someone would, after the guests had been plied with alcohol, someone would fire up a joint or break out a line of coke or something sexually inappropriate would happen. And the people that wanted no part of that would leave, but then the people that wanted to stick around, they would become compromised.
So, it would start with Lawrence King and Craig Spence. Craig Spence was the one in D.C. running these high society parties. Essentially, and this is what it sounds like with the Franklin scandal, but also Epstein, Diddy. There's phase one of the party which is like ground level. Everyone gets in, you start drinking a little bit. There's no really hard drugs out, or if there are, it's not really visible. And then all of a sudden, people start to go home. Maybe people with kids are like, all right, we're out of here. We're not going to continue. It's midnight. And then all of a sudden, phase 2 hits. Drugs start coming out in the visible realm. Maybe people are making out, some sexual innuendo. People start talking about, like, do you want to stick around for the real party, stuff like that. Is that kind of the vibe of these parties? Like, you'd get to see who was really down as the night went on, when people become more intoxicated.
It was called the party after the party.
Mm.
And Nebraska Social Services, kids had come forward to Nebraska Social Services, and they were aware that Lawrence E. King was running this nationwide pedophile network.
Yeah. Because Julie Walters is in the book.
Yes.
She was one of the Boys Town social workers, which is where King was getting a lot of these kids. And we'll talk about the whole Boys Town pipeline. But one of the parts of the book that I found fascinating was that Julie Walters, this Boys Town social worker, writes a report describing this child exploitation ring, and then she gives it to the FBI, or I forget exactly who she hands it to, but then there's basically no follow-up. Like, nothing really came of it.
Well, she handed it to, first of all, the guy who ran Boys Town, Father Val Peter, and, and he was aware that Boys Town was a pedophilic smorgasbord, but he covered it all up.
Yeah.
And I think it had started under his predecessor, Father Hupp, was a drunk. And the number 2 guy was Father James Kelly, and he'd been in upstate New York molesting kids.
Mm.
A lot of kids. And then the Catholic Church, in its infinite wisdom, moved him to Boys Town. So Boys Town was ripe at that point. The director of Boys Town, was kind of a titular head. He was a drunk. And then the number 2 guy was a pedophile. And I think that Father James Kelly got compromised.
Yeah. So where does a guy, you hear about these characters like King, Epstein, Spence? How are these people born? Because they have to come from somewhere, not literally born, but like, how are they born into the fires of this blackmail pedophilic world? What is the entry point? And with the Franklin scandal, I guess it would be King and Spence. Like, and we could start with King first. Where is Lawrence King coming from? What is his like entrance into this world, and where was he before that?
Well, both King and Spence came, like Epstein, and like Diddy, they came from working class families.
Mm.
And I think King and Spence were in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. King had a top security clearance for the Air Force, and Spence was an ABC reporter. And my guess on this is just my surmise, but I think I'm probably right. I think that both of them got busted molesting little boys in Southeast Asia. And then,
are there any documents linking them in like same squadron and stuff like that?
None.
Okay.
But this is just my extrapolation. Yeah. They got busted, and the dark, malignant corner of intelligence that does this type of thing said, well, you can either go to prison or you can work for us. And because when both of them came back to the United States, their careers just exploded.
Mm.
So something happened to them in Southeast Asia, both of them, that enabled their careers to explode. And I think that was it.
Yeah, that's what it seems like when I read about a lot of these cover-ups, is that people, it seems like they get compromised and then they fail upwards. They participate in a cover-up, people are not happy, but then all of a sudden they get a judge position or cabinet position. Like, it's this weird upwards movement of people you wouldn't think would be qualified or you wouldn't think would be excelling in certain positions. They just keep somehow moving up the ladder.
Clarence Thomas is a perfect example of that.
Is he the
Supreme Court Justice
Okay.
that's essentially declared war on American citizens. And he's a porno junkie, and he's also there was those hearings between Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas for him to become a Supreme Court justice. And it was a he said, she said affair, but there were like 7 Anita Hills. And there was one, Angela Wright, who was in Washington, D.C. She was going to back up Anita Hill. But Joe Biden was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And he didn't call her, and he lied about that. He said that she didn't want to testify, but she was willing to testify.
Yeah.
So he lied about that. And that's kind of shows you where the politics are, because Clarence Thomas's decisions have been antithetical to what the Democratic Party ostensibly believes. But yet Biden let this pervert on the Supreme Court, and he was rewarded. So that's kind of a long. And the blackmail photographer who I talked to, because when I was
is this Rusty Nelson? Okay.
And I said, this is when I was first cutting my teeth on. I said, well, how does this work? This is such a weird parallel universe. I said, how does this work? And he goes, once you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and it's a beautiful yacht, and you can have anything you want on the yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. So there's zero incentive for people to get off the yacht. And if they stay on the yacht, they will become upwardly mobile.
Okay. So you think, in your best educated guess, that Spence and King had something happen where they're molesting boys in Southeast Asia, they get caught up, and they're given a fork in the road, which is you're fucked or you get on the yacht.
Yes.
And they both chose to get on the yacht.
They both chose the yacht, yeah.
And so what happens when they get back to America? What's sort of the trajectory of Spence and King to get into the positions that they found themselves in?
Okay, King got this job at the Franklin Community Credit Federal Union. And now, I've been told that it was Susie Buffett that gave King the money to really get it going. Warren Buffett's first wife.
Okay.
Warren Buffett, actually, King threw a party for Warren Buffett, but Warren Buffett lied in the media and said that he'd never been to the party.
Is that, where did you hear that? Is that from documentation
I believe it's in an Esquire magazine.
Okay. That's Susie Buffett.
No. I heard that Susie Buffett gave King the money.
Okay.
But and there's no way that Susie Buffett's going to pony up a lot of money unless Warren knows about it. That's my belief on that. So I believe that there was Buffett money behind the Franklin Credit Union.
Okay. So King establishes the credit union with the help of Susie Buffett, according to what you've heard, according to rumor. Then how does he start the Boys Town pipeline? Does he start going after children right away? Is he actually trying to function as a credit union at all? Is he, trying to at least keep up a facade, or what's sort of his deal?
Well, he turned that credit union into a boiler room. And they were offering CDs at way below the market rate. And he ultimately embezzled like $40 million. The feds say $40 million from the Franklin Credit Union. With him drug addicts find each other. They just know where to go. I mean, you could pull a drug addict off the streets of Philadelphia or Miami, and you could airlift him in New York City, and they would find out where to get drugs. And I think pedophiles are the same way. And as I said earlier,
it's like a bat signal, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, they're tuned in. And the number 2 guy at Boys Town was Father James Kelly, who is a notorious pedophile. So I don't know how those two connected, but I definitely believe that they connected.
Okay. And so I wanted to go back to Rusty Nelson because you brought him up, and I'm remembering there's an incident in the book where didn't you drive from Minnesota to Nebraska at one point to investigate, and then you actually picked up Rusty Nelson? Can you tell that story of what happened when you guys got pulled over?
Well, Rusty said that he had blackmail pictures. Rusty is supposed to register as a sex offender. And I got money to one of his attorneys so he could fight it. And under the condition, he said that he had blackmail pictures, under the condition that he gave me the blackmail pictures. So he took me on this wild goose chase in Colorado for these blackmail pictures. And I quickly concluded that after a couple of days that he was just bullshitting me. Like I said, given his vocational pursuits, he's not going to be the
not the most reliable guy. Blackmail pedophilic photographers.
So I was driving back. I was going to drop him off at his girlfriend's place, and we were on this desolate highway. And I got pulled over. And I start the book with this. The cop has... I show the cop my driver's license. He doesn't, he doesn't want to see my driver's license. He doesn't want to see my registration. He just wants me to get in his car. And I get in the car.
Did he even bother saying why he pulled you over, or was it one of those things where you're just like, it's better to comply in the situation than ask?
No. He said I was doing, I think it was 64 in a 60-mile-an-hour. So
that makes sense. 4 miles over, you're dangerous to society.
It was very nominal, and but we're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, and I'm with someone who's got a very bad record because he's done some very bad things. So it's a tough situation for me. And I got out, and that guy was polished. Most of these Nebraska State Patrol guys I met are kind of obese, and they don't seem to have like a tremendous amount of gray matter.
Yeah, they're not going to win a chase. You could just walk at a normal pace away from them and you'll be fine.
But this guy was pretty polished, pretty buff, and he was different than these other Nebraska State Patrol troopers I met. So,
was it just his physical appearance, or was it energy-wise too?
Everything
he was giving off
his physical appearance, his energy. It was like he'd been minted in Langley. I mean, that's the vibe.
Like a CIA Captain America.
Yeah, that's the vibe that I got from him. So he put me in this car, and he called in for priors. I don't have priors. Then he calls up for backup, and then he calls in Rusty's name. And then the dispatcher gives a lot of numbers. And I know that they're very bad numbers because it's Rusty Nelson. So then they take Rusty Nelson and they put him between. I'm in the squad car, and this other Nebraska State Patrol guy has pulled up, and they put Rusty between the two cars. Now, the guy that showed up struck me as a Nebraska State Patrol guy. He had a dog, and they just ripped everything apart in this SUV that I'd rented. I mean, everything.
Yeah.
And they found nothing because I'd been on this wild goose chase. And, but yeah, I think that was the most frightened I was.
Yeah.
And Franklin, because I'm with a very nefarious guy, and we're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the cop said to me, we can search your car now, or we can arrest you and pound the car and search it. We're going to go one of two ways.
Yeah.
So I knew that like ACLU buzzwords were not going to ameliorate the situation. It was that guy was going to search that car.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a very jarring situation. I wasn't, I mean, I did have a similar thing. I wasn't with someone who the law was after, but I was speeding across state borders, North Carolina, Virginia, when I was playing summer baseball. This is over a decade ago. And I was going like 90, 95, probably not a single person on the road. And I get pulled over, and I got the same thing where they said, we're going to search your car or we're going to take you in. And then they called for backup. They brought dogs. They bomb sniffed the car, drug sniffed the car, tearing everything up. 20 minutes passes and they let me go. And nothing happened, but I was shaken up just from watching that happen and going through that. So I can't imagine how jarring that must have been to get pulled over with Rusty Nelson in the car with you.
And I've had a death threat and all kinds of strange phone calls too. So there was that.
Yeah.
That problem also. So yeah, I was, that was, as I said, it was the most frightened I was throughout my entire Franklin Odyssey.
So what is the orchestration like between, so you have the kids from Boys Town that are getting molested as part of the Franklin scandal being run by King. Lawrence King is in Omaha, and then you have Spence who's in DC. How is that coming together? Like, is Spence making trips out to Omaha to also molest kids? Is King flying back and forth from DC? Like, how are they sort of intersecting to jointly run this molestation operation, essentially?
I think Spence would occasionally fly to Nebraska with some power broker types, but I acquired like 200 passenger manifests of King's, and the vast majority go to Washington, D.C. He was flying to Washington, D.C. like every weekend.
Yeah. And so Gary Caradori is one of the heroes of this story. Can you tell the story of how Caradori gets involved and what his role is in the Franklin scandal?
Okay, what happened was King got busted embezzling the $40 million shortly after George Herbert Walker Bush won the election. And he gets arrested, and there's some senators in the Nebraska Senate that it comes out that he hasn't been audited in 4 years. Federally insured credit unions have to be audited every year. And when it came out that he was able to get $40 million and it hadn't been audited in 4 years, they formed the Franklin Committee to look into that. And shortly after they formed the Franklin Committee, social services people approached them and said, King's a thief, but he's also running a pedophile network. And they had like Julie Walters' report, and they had other things too. A couple of kids had come forward on record. And then these social services personnel had given this information to both state and federal law enforcement, and they were just ignored. There wasn't any type of investigation whatsoever. So they went to the senators and they said, King is running a pedophile network and you guys should look into that too. And the Nebraska Senate subcommittee eventually hired an amazing investigator named Gary Caradori. And he was finding other kids. Like, I've got all his investigative reports. As I said earlier, I've got like 200 passenger manifests. Those were the passenger manifests that Gary Caradori got. Everything that Gary Caradori acquired, I eventually acquired. And And then he started really pursuing the child abuse angle. And as he was pursuing this, the FBI was threatening witnesses, threatening him. His phones were tapped. The FBI was heavily involved, the Omaha office, in covering this up. And Gary Caradori realized that one of the victims, her name is Alicia Owen, who came forward to Gary Caradori, told him that her lawyer had said that if she gave, if she said that Gary Caradori gave them money in a script, that her problems would be taken care of. And so, and she relayed that to Gary Caradori. And at that point, Gary Caradori realized that he had become the prey, not the predator. And he was an amazing investigator. And that was his thing, that was one of his favorite things, was getting girls out of trafficking scenarios.
Do we know who approached Alicia Owen exactly and said, if you say this whole thing was scripted?
Her attorney, Pamela Vukotic.
Okay.
Who has since surrendered her law license.
And so I'm assuming someone from some dark corner approached her attorney, relayed that. Like, she didn't come up with it on her own.
No, it was probably an FBI guy.
Okay.
Because those FBI guys were really dirty.
And so Caradori hears that, realizes, I'm now the person that people are coming after. Where does he go from there? How does he decide to move forward with the investigation?
Okay, so two of the kids had told him about Rusty Nelson. And the FBI had been very draconian to Rusty Nelson. They said, get out of the state, or else you're going to have some problems. So he split.
They said they knew what he was doing, but they told him to leave. Like, we know you're a pedophile and you're taking photos of underage kids. You should leave the state. That was pretty much all they said to him.
That's what they said.
Okay.
And now Rusty would say he's not a pedophile, that he was taking pictures of them in compromising positions. So, I mean, that's what Rusty would say.
Yeah. It's never a good position to be in, to say, technically, I'm not a pedophile. Usually, if you start a sentence like that, you're a pedophile.
So, Caradori found Rusty Nelson, who was living in the Southwest. And Caradori, under the cover of going to see the All-Star game with his 8-year-old son, AJ, he had his own plan. He flew to Washington, D.C. And I've got 5 with Rusty. His veracity is suspect, but I've got 4 people that corroborate him, that Gary Caradori did, in fact, get pictures in Chicago. And he was flying back to Nebraska, and his plane exploded over Lee County, Illinois, and he was killed and his son was killed. And those pictures were never recovered.
Who was able to confirm that who was able to confirm that Caradori got the pictures when he flew to Chicago?
Paul Rodriguez, a former Washington Times journalist, Lauren Schmidt, the chairman of the Nebraska committee, his wife, Sandy Caradori, and also Donna Owen, Alicia's mother. So he had called these 4 people very cryptically from a payphone, but he wasn't cryptic enough.
And what did he say? Essentially, like, I got what I needed, something like that?
Well, he told Rodriguez that he had gotten pictures.
Okay.
And then he told Schmidt that we got him. And he also told his wife that we got him. And then he told Donna that because Alicia had been arrested and she was in solitary, they put her in solitary confinement. Caradori told Alicia's mother, Donna Owen, that she would be the happiest mother in the world when he got back from Chicago.
So Is Caradori, was he flying the plane?
Yes.
So he flew the plane. Where did he leave from to go to Chicago?
Chicago Midway Airport.
Okay, so he flew
From Lincoln, Nebraska.
Lincoln to Chicago, then he's flying Chicago back to Lincoln. His plane crashes somewhere between there. That's the story, or just engine failure. What's the story?
It's broken up over a wide period, so
Okay.
or a wide tract of land, and the farmer heard an explosion. So I would think that it's fairly safe to surmise that the plane exploded. And now, according to the National Transportation Safety Board, the wings came off on his plane. And that does not happen with Cessnas. The wings just don't come off of this plane. But there was so much malfeasance in that cover-up, too. Everything with Franklin is a cover-up. And then there were two grand juries. There was a state grand jury and a federal grand jury. And the FBI came in and really put heat on a bunch of those kids to recant their accounts of abuse. But there were two kids that wouldn't recant. One was Alicia Owen, one was Paul Benassi. And Alicia was indicted on 8 counts of perjury by a state grand jury for saying, she said that she had been molested by repeatedly by the Omaha police chief, Robert Wadman. That she'd been molested by a judge in Douglas County. And then she also said that Harold Anderson, the publisher of the World Herald, he had seen her, or she had seen him molesting like boys that were 7 or 8 years old at these pedophilic orgies.
Was anything recovered from the Caradori crash?
No, and he always had this leather attaché case with him, and that was missing.
Okay, so the case goes missing. Nothing's recovered from the crash. And then is the crash happening while the trial is going on, or where is that?
No,
like the Alicia Owen, Paul Benassi trial, the two victims that you mentioned.
The crash is happening during the grand jury, the state grand jury. And I don't know if your listeners or viewers are familiar with how a grand jury works, but they're notoriously easy to corrupt. There was a New York justice that said a special prosecutor of grand juries has so much power over them that they could get grand jurors to indict a ham sandwich.
Yeah.
And how a grand jury works is a special prosecutor is chosen. And grand jurors are just people that have shown up for jury duty and they've been funneled into a grand jury. And the special prosecutor presents the evidence to them. It's not adversarial. It's whatever that special prosecutor wants the grand jurors to see, they see. And then he calls the witnesses. And that's why there's only 2 countries in the world that have a grand jury system. The United States and that bastion of justice, Liberia, because they're just so easy to corrupt.
So the prosecutor can essentially pick and choose which evidence to show in a grand jury. It's much more controlled than a regular trial.
Totally controlled. It's completely he controls it. Like the Epstein grand jury concluded that he hadn't molested a single child. And the state grand jury indicted Alicia on 8 counts of perjury and indicted Paul on 3 counts of perjury. So Alicia was looking at 160 years and Paul was looking at 60. And then a federal grand jury indicted Alicia on 8 counts of perjury. And so she was ultimately looking at 200 years.
Jesus.
And the biggest chapter in the book is the state versus Owen. And I really show just how corrupt her trial was.
Yeah.
And
it was one of the longest criminal trials in Nebraska history.
I think it was the longest criminal trial in Nebraska history. And despite all the malfeasance, the grand jurors were still out for 3 days. And it's very interesting. CBS's 48 Hours ran an episode about Franklin while the grand jurors were deliberating, or while her jurors were deliberating. And it had the police chief that had molested her talk about how horrible it is that these rumors are bubbling up. And then
Do the jurors have access to media during this time?
Oh,
Can
yeah, all of them watched
they can look at
all
TV. Okay.
all of them watched it, according to affidavits.
They've talked about it?
Yeah, yeah. So, and then there was one of the kids, Troy Bonner, who the FBI got to flip, and he said, yes, I made up all these lies about these rich people. We wanted to get money and fame and things like, I mean, just utter nonsense. But that affected the Alicia's jury. So Alicia was ultimately sentenced to between 9 and 15 years for perjury. We're talking, she was 21 years old, and they put her in solitary confinement for 2 years. They put a kid, and according to state and federal law enforcement, not a single child was molested during the Franklin network. Not a single child.
Has she ever recanted her story?
No, actually, I started an organization called Epstein Justice, where we really want to get justice for what we want is we want a commission, and that and we just want two simple things from that commission. We want to know why the government covered up Jeffrey Epstein related child trafficking, and we want the perpetrators to be prosecuted. And she's an associate director of mine.
Yeah.
I don't know how she did it, but she made it through it all.
So she's in solitary confinement for 2 years as a 21-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're coming to her every day saying all you got to do is just say you made this up and you lied and it'll all go away. And she never went back on her original story.
No, and I think that they realized that she never would. I mean, that regardless of what they did to her.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to one of the moments in the trial because weren't there some weird things going on in the jury room when they were deliberating on Alicia? Like things were planted in there that weren't supposed to be planted?
Things were planted in the jury room that hadn't been introduced into evidence. And then also the jurors or the jurors wanted documents that had been produced into evidence, and they were not given those documents either.
Who do you think is orchestrating these pedophile operations and recruiting assets like Spence, like Lawrence King? What organization do you think is above them that's making all of this happen? You know, Caradori plane crash, suspicious, King and Spence having, sketchy backgrounds, things happening to them like that just disappears and they're put in positions of power. Who do you think is running all this behind the scenes?
I think it's some dark, malignant corner of intelligence. You can say CIA, but I'm sure that there are many, many people in the CIA that aren't even aware of this. But it's some dark, malignant corner of our intelligence.
And to that dark corner of intelligence, people like King and Spence are dispensable. They're just the front for the activity, but if they go away, they'll just recruit someone else, essentially.
Well, with Spence, he killed himself. And I do believe that he killed himself. I think that he was given a choice where either, we can kill you or you can kill you.
Yeah.
And he went to the Ritz-Carlton in Boston and put on a tuxedo and took an overdose of an antidepressant called nortriptyline. And he had a clipping of talking about how CIA assets and agents shouldn't be called to testify before government entities because he'd been called to testify before a very corrupt grand jury in Washington, D.C. that covered this up. So there were 3 grand juries that covered this up.
Do you think they gave Spence a choice? Do you think they said if you don't kill yourself, we'll kill you, or he just figured it out, like I'm gonna die at some point if I testify?
I mean, one or the other, but I think that someone had a talk with Spence.
Yeah.
Now with King, it's kind of interesting because they put him in a mental institution during the 2 grand juries.
Yeah.
And so he was completely inaccessible. And I think that they had now when I'm saying they, I'm talking about this dark malignant corner of intelligence who was at a federal or a federal hospital for prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. And which is it's kind of an infamous place. But anyway, I think that they had and when I'm saying they, I'm talking about that dark malignant corner of intelligence. I think that they said to King, Larry, you've done some good stuff for us, and, we're really appreciative. Now, if you talk, you're going to end up like Spence. If you keep your mouth shut, we'll take care of you. I mean, you're going to have to do some time.
Yeah.
But we'll take care of you. And so when he did about 10 years, and then he had a no-show job at a BMW dealership in Alexandria, Virginia.
And then before King went into the psychiatric hospital during the 2 grand juries, which essentially, makes him mentally unfit to stand trial, so you get out of it. Didn't the first President Bush come visit, or there was something happen where he came to visit on the same day or around the same time, and then King was sent to the mental institution?
George Herbert Walker Bush had come to Nebraska to campaign. And Lawrence King, I believe, had a ticket to the fundraiser.
Mm.
And it was, I believe, Secret Service people. Could have been U.S. Marshals that drove him to Missouri. And they did so without a motion from either the government or King's attorneys. They just snatched him and took him to the hospital.
Yeah. And he's still alive today, Lawrence King.
He is.
Spence killed himself, but King is alive. What do you know about his whereabouts?
I follow his whereabouts quite assiduously. He tries to get involved with organizations that would give him access to children. He got involved with Granville Academy. And Granville Academy isn't an academy, and it's not even a school. It just takes children on field trips, lower socioeconomic children on field trips. And I thought that this is a bad idea, that Lawrence King is involved with this.
Yeah.
So I got him kicked out of there. And then he shows up at the Washington Redskins event committee, and then I get him kicked out of there. And then he shows up at Opera Nova, which gives lower socioeconomic children. Opera Nova does a number of things, but it gives lower socioeconomic children, teaches them how to sing. And then I got him kicked out of there. And now he's at a church, and they're reluctant to kick him out. So I'm kind of, I wonder about that church. But
and I'm assuming you've tried to message them. Hey, this guy's pretty fucked up.
And talked to them.
You've called them, or you called King, or
no?
Both?
Well, I called King once, and he said he wasn't King, so I wasn't going to get much traction with that. But that shows you how crazy this is. We've got a predator, that a serial child rapist that the government knows about. There are people in the federal government that knows that he's a serial child rapist, and it's up to a journalist to protect the kids.
Yeah.
I mean, that shows you how ass backwards it is.
Well, yeah, we were talking about something that Congressman Tim Burchett said before the podcast, and Tim Burchett said that I'm sure members of Congress are being honey trapped. And for him to come out and say that, he knows his peers are going to see that. He knows the public's going to be reading that, reacting to his statements. For him to just openly say, yeah, people are being compromised for sure. It's not even a question in my mind. That's pretty crazy for a congressman to just come out and say that.
Well, it shows that he's clean because he said that in December and now it's October. If he wasn't clean, he'd be gone by now.
Yeah. Seems like it.
And I don't know how many are clean. I think a minority, actually.
Yeah. So I wanted to actually go back to a moment with Spence, and it was a very creepy moment, and I forget which book this is in because you also wrote a book about Henry Vinson.
Yes.
And there's a moment with Vincent and Craig Spence where they have an encounter, and Spence essentially reveals to Vincent who he is and what he does. Can you tell the story of that moment between Vincent and Spence?
Henry Vinson is a mortician from West Virginia and grew up in this very repressed Christian family.
Hmm.
And actually, I think his grandparents were like snake handlers. And
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
So Henry went to Washington, D.C., and he would go out with party with some other gay morticians, and they would go to a bar that was like D.C.'s version or the gay version of the Chippendales. And he met a dancer, and they started having dinner together. And then the dancer told him that he was an escort, and he could make up to $5,000 a night as an escort. And then
Pretty good cash.
and this we're talking mid 80s now.
Yeah.
And the dancer said that he knew of a escort service that was up for sale because the guy was dying of AIDS. And Henry now Henry is a very shy, circumspect guy. If you knew Henry, this would be like the last thing that he would do. But
Yeah.
the impetuousness of youth, he decided to buy that escort service. And the thing about Henry is he's a brilliant guy. And he went through the yellow pages and he called up all the escort services. And most escort services are fly by night and they don't pay their phone bills. So Henry would say to them, when he came across a number that had been disconnected, he'd call up the phone company and he would say, I will pay the arrears on that phone number if you give me the number. So he ended up with like half the numbers in the yellow pages of escort services.
Wow. So he buys this company, acquires the escort numbers.
Yes.
So now he's in business. This, snake handler is now repping other snakes.
He was never a snake handler, but
coming from a family of snake handlers,
a very repressed.
He's continuing the family business in a different way.
So Henry started getting calls from Craig Spence, and we're talking mid 80s money. Spence was spending $20,000 to $25,000 a month on his escorts, and Spence would summon him. And Henry went to Spence had summoned Henry, and Henry went to Spence's place. And there was Lawrence King and Craig Spence, two highly malignant individuals. And I think that there was a sugar cup filled with Coke. And King and Spence are talking about how much power they have, how much money they have. They're nouveau rich and blowhards.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, Spence seems to take an interest in Henry and asks Henry, where did you go to school? Where'd you grow up? Where did you go to mortuary school? And Henry is like, since Spence has seismic narcissism. Seismic.
Hmm.
And Henry's thinking that he's witnessing the Red Sea parting because Spence had only cared about himself.
Yeah.
He'd never cared about Henry's, whatever Henry thought or felt, nothing. So Henry, and then he was asking him about the machinations of his escort service. And then at a certain point, Spence summons Henry, and he goes into a closet, and behind the closet is like this fake door, and they go into a room that's filled with monitors. And Epstein had this, and so did Diddy. And Spence hits a couple of buttons, and then all of a sudden there's Henry talking about running his escort service.
Yeah.
And Spence says to Henry, I blackmail people for a living and consider yourself blackmailed.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a legit movie James Bond villainous moment.
Yeah.
Some guy pulling back the curtain and going, yeah, I got you, bitch.
Yeah. That's poor Henry.
Yeah. Poor Henry. Well, on that note, let's take a break because I do want to dive into Epstein, which, as you were saying before we started recording, there's a lot of things in common with the Franklin scandal story. So let's take a break and then we'll dive back in.
Sounds good.
We are back, and we left off at the end of the Franklin scandal. And you've said multiple times on multiple podcasts, because that's part of what I do. I stalk the podcasts of guests that come on the show. You've said that the Franklin scandal and the Epstein cover-up are carbon copies of each other. What are the elements that you see with Epstein before we dive into the specifics? Because there's a shit ton we're going to get into. What are sort of the overarching similarities you see between the Epstein cover-up and the Franklin scandal?
Well, you had a couple of pedophilic pimps. You had Maxwell and Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, flying kids around the country and actually around the world too. Also that island. Epstein was hooked up to intelligence. All his houses were wired for audiovisual blackmail. A grand jury was used to cover up Epstein. And Epstein, like Spence, killed himself, or ostensibly killed himself. But Ghislaine Maxwell kept her mouth shut, and now she's living in a dormitory. She got a sentence of 20 years. The Ghislaine Maxwell, it really shows just how corrupt it is, because she trafficked children for 25 years. And she was indicted on one count of child trafficking. And actually, all of her indictments, or a number of her indictments, had conspiracy with it. But there was no other conspirators that were indicted. That should kind of give people an idea of how corrupt that is. Yeah,
you've said that her trial was a sham. That
it was carefully choreographed.
Yeah. How was, or actually, let's get into Jeffrey Epstein's origin story first, because if we jump straight into the trial, it might be getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Where does Epstein come from? What's his background story?
He is essentially a blue-collar background from Coney Island. Not too far from here.
Yeah. And so blue-collar, like Spence and King. That sort of upbringing.
Yeah. And I don't know how, but he ended up at Interlaken, which is a very prestigious arts camp, in 1967. If you go to my website, I've got pictures of little Jeffrey Epstein at Interlaken, and I've got someone that is a doppelganger for William Barr.
The Attorney General?
Yes, that didn't go after. Actually, William Barr was the Attorney General for Franklin, and then he was the Attorney General for Epstein under Trump.
Wow. So William Barr is connected to the Franklin scandal and the Epstein cover-up.
Yeah, he played an integral role in covering both of them up.
Okay.
And I believe that he and Epstein went to Interlochen art camp at the same time. Interlochen can't lie about Epstein because there was an Epstein lodge. Epstein gave them $500,000 to build an Epstein. And I don't, needless to say, it's no longer called Epstein Lodge or whatever. It had Epstein something.
Yeah. I'm sure they didn't give the money back, though. I'm sure they kept that.
No,
$500K.
The place was already built. So,
okay, I gotcha.
But I've got yearbooks from that art camp. And what's really bizarre is there's no names. Have you ever seen a yearbook that has no names?
I can't say I have.
No. And your viewers and listeners can go to my website, nickbryantnyc.com, and they can see a little Jeffrey Epstein, and they can see who I believe is a little Don Barr, or not Don Barr, but William Barr. But Interlochen said that William Barr was never there. But what's interesting is 7 years later, Donald Barr, William Barr's father, hires Jeffrey Epstein to teach at Dalton, which is one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the United States, in the world. And Jeffrey Epstein is a college dropout. So that doesn't make a lot of sense.
So Donald Barr is the president, principal of Dalton.
He was the headmaster of Dalton who hired Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay. So Epstein, college dropout, gets hired to teach at one of the most prestigious high schools in America.
Yes.
Where does he go from there? How does he start to infiltrate high society?
Well, he goes to Bear Stearns, and then in 1988, and this is stunning, actually. In 1988, Les Wexner, who owns The Limited, which has Victoria's Secret, Tommy Hilfiger, et cetera, gives Jeffrey Epstein the keys to his kingdom, gives him power of attorney over everything. His billions of dollars. Whatever Jeffrey Epstein wants to do with his money, he can do.
What year is this?
1988.
So how old is Epstein at this point?
He would be in his 30s.
Okay, so he's a 30-year-old college dropout that taught for a few years.
Yeah.
Gets a position at Bear Stearns, but he's not a billionaire financier.
No.
He's not managing billionaire portfolios at this point, but a billionaire hands Epstein the keys
to his
billionaire fortune.
Yeah. Now, this is interesting. I can't recall if it's the New York Times or Vanity Fair, but this, when I said stunning, this is stunning. The reason why, and I wish I could remember if it was Vanity Fair or New York Times. It's one or the other. I mean, both of them played an integral role in covering all this up, but the reason why, and they said this, they wrote it, it was published. The reason why Les Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein the keys to his kingdom is because he was lonely. They said that. Yeah.
That was published. A quote from Les Wexner said, "I was lonely."
No, the magazine.
The magazine
said it was because he was lonely.
Okay.
That he gave Jeffrey Epstein the keys to his kingdom. He was lonely.
Was it some sort of like Onion type article?
No,
sarcastic?
No,
they were genuinely reporting.
This is the bullshit that has been sold to America.
Yeah.
And because the mainstream media doesn't want to see justice here, I've been following Epstein since 2011, 2012. And I've never seen any major mainstream media scream for justice. They love to dig up salacious facts, but none of them scream for justice.
The lonely thing is weird, though, because Les Wexner has billions of dollars at this point. He could easily pay a companion for much less. That there are people that would hang out with him.
Well, he's
for
married
hundreds of-
and he's got children. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he has resources. He could go fuck off on a private jet somewhere, find some, companionship for much less than signing over the keys to his fortune. But yet he says, I'm lonely, or Variety, whoever reports Les Wexner is lonely.
It was either Vanity. I think it was Vanity Fair. It was either Vanity Fair or the New York Times.
And reports that Les Wexner is feeling lonely, and therefore to cure his loneliness, he gives mid-30s dropout
Yes.
the authority over his entire fortune.
Yes.
I mean, it's crazy, but it also doesn't make sense at all.
Because I guess that Jeffrey would be his friend then.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard sell to not become your friend at that point.
There's so much bullshit that has been written about Epstein. So much bullshit that it's frustrating to me.
Yeah. What is some of the bullshit that was written about Epstein before all of the pedophile island and the dark corners of his personality came to light? What sort of BS narrative headline traffic was Epstein perpetuating back in the day?
Well, he was a successful hedge fund manager. And then it came out that he was like a lone pedophile. Like, you've got Lee Harvey Oswald as a lone shooter. Epstein was a lone pedophile. And the Franklin scandal had been published in 2009, 2010. I did not want to investigate another network. I really didn't. But I kept on seeing these articles where he's a lone pedophile, and I'm not buying it, considering how well I know Franklin. And then there's that grand jury that was completely cooked that said that he didn't molest a single child. So I was living in Brooklyn. I was pretty broke, but I had enough money to go to Florida. And I went to Florida and I started investigating. And that's when I acquired his little black book, which I'd eventually put up on the internet in 2015. And he had like long lists of victims. And I started calling victims. And they were talking about being flown around into an island. I mean, before any of this was reported. And at that point, I knew that this was another network.
Were the victims also in the black book, or was the black book just contacts for pedophiles or, celebrities?
The black book had everything. Everybody.
What were the most intriguing parts of the black book that stood out to you? The structure of it, names, anything that you would see when you were flipping through the pages?
Well, it was a who's who. The ruling class of the United States. The most powerful people. George Mitchell. Epstein. Now, Epstein, how the black book, how I got it. I can give you a kind of a general explanation of it. Alfredo Rodriguez was Epstein's house manager. And he made a copy of the black book. And Rodriguez wanted to make some money off of this. And there was an attorney there were attorneys that were filing civil lawsuits against Epstein on behalf of his victims. And he called up one of the attorneys. And he said, I will sell you the Holy Grail. And Epstein, I'll sell you Epstein's Holy Grail, which was the black book. And then the attorney called the FBI, and the FBI did a sting on him. And then the FBI ultimately got the book, and then I got the book through some people who got the book from the FBI.
Was everyone in this book someone who was participating in the Epstein underworld, the pedophile
No,
parties, trafficking.
but a lot of them were. And Alfredo Rodriguez circled people that he thought that he had personally witnessed someone being in cahoots with Epstein. But then there's people like Clinton, because Epstein was providing women to Clinton when Clinton was in the White House. There's people like Clinton. There's 25 contact numbers for Clinton.
Was Epstein bringing women to the White House?
Yeah, he was bringing women to the White House.
Okay.
Not minors, but adults for Clinton.
Are there White House staff or anyone who can attest to that, or is it more?
Yeah,
rumors?
no, it's. You can go to Google Epstein Clinton White House, and
Gotcha.
And there'll be some mainstream magazine articles about it from the UK.
Okay. So at what point, because Epstein now he's in with Les Wexner. He's
Les is lonely.
Les is lonely,
Yeah.
so he gives over his fortune. I think doesn't he become a name for just high level finance management? People are handing him over billions of dollars, like not just Les Wexner, but other wealthy people are also giving him their money to manage. He's known as this high level guy that kind of comes out of nowhere.
There's so much misinformation there. Leon Black, who was head of Apollo, which is a huge hedge fund, gave Epstein $150 million. Now, he said that he gave Epstein $150 million because Epstein was going to be able to save him money on his taxes. That's what Leon Black said. That's what our media reported. As if Leon Black doesn't have, like, Apollo management is huge. I mean, they've got a floor of accountants that are working on saving Apollo management from giving too much to the IRS. But that is another bogus cover story that the media has gone with, that Jeffrey Epstein helped Leon Black save $150 million.
Yeah. That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that if I walked into, XYZ hedge fund or a bank, and I said, I'm worth $5 billion, I would like to give you $1 billion, I would have a team of 30 people and 20 more interns assigned to my account that are going to help me manage my money any which way.
Yeah.
And I'd be on calls. I'd have people that are catering to me 24/7 because I'm giving the bank so much goddamn money. But for some reason, these billionaires who know how to keep money and stay wealthy are just, giving it to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes.
This high power broker finance guy that just comes out of the blue with not really any discernible track record in finance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he swindled some people, but I think a lot of it was blackmail.
When do you think he enters the blackmail world? Do you think that's with Les Wexner, or when do you think he or let me put it another way. Do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein was intelligence, that he was acting on behalf of some intelligence agency?
Absolutely.
At what point do you think he became compromised and then started to act like the asset that they wanted him to be?
It's like with King and Spence. We can make some extrapolations, but it's impossible to know. I do not know when Epstein got turned, but at some point in the 80s, he got turned.
Yeah.
He was working at Dalton in 74 and 76, and then he went to Bear Stearns, and then he was with some other Wall Street companies. But in 1988, he emerges with Les Wexner's billions, so he can do whatever he wants at that point. And then people like Leon Black are giving him $150 million.
Yeah. There's a quote, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a new book called Selling Sexy, which is a book that came out on Victoria's Secret, all the things that happened behind the scenes. And there's a quote about what Les Wexner giving Epstein the power of attorney. And this is directly from that book. It says, quote, a former top company executive stated, it just makes no sense why Wexner did any of that to allow Epstein to manage all his money. It was so baffling. Everyone thought Les was such a retail genius. And then he did this. It was so bizarre. So, yeah, it just makes no sense. His Epstein's involvement with Les Wexner, and unless you like build some story behind it, or the lonely thing, like it just doesn't add up.
Les Wexner had big time ties to the mafia.
Really?
Yeah. And I wrote an article for Sheer Post where I get into his ties to the mafia. And there was a guy named Frank Walsh who did most of the carding for L Brands. And he was a Genovese guy.
Carding is like delivering products, stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah. And actually there was an attorney that worked for L Brands, not specifically for L Brands, but L Brands used that law firm. And this attorney was like the point man, the law firm's point man for L Brands and Les Wexner. And he was shot execution style in Columbus, Ohio, in the middle of the day. 222s to the back of his head. And there was an investigation, and there was someone at the Columbus Police Department who wrote a homicide report. And Wexner was the one that was named as most likely.
Really?
Yeah.
There's a homicide report that
Yes.
people can look at that
Yes.
names
Yes.
Les Wexner.
Yes. And you can go to my article at that was published by the Sheer Post. Google Nick Bryant Sheer Post Epstein, and I put the whole report so you can link onto it.
And so Arthur Shapiro was the lawyer for Wexner? Or
Yes. Yeah. Well, he was a partner at a law firm.
a partner? Okay.
That did work for the L Brands.
Okay.
And he was shot in the middle of the day in Columbus, Ohio. And I called his wife. I was trying to get information, and but she didn't want to talk. I understood. I never called her back. But the police chief ordered that homicide report to be destroyed.
Wow.
And someone smuggled it out of there and then gave it to somebody who I eventually got it from.
So was Arthur Shapiro, do you think he saw something, or like why would Lex Wexner have his own lawyer killed?
I have no idea.
Wild shit.
But yeah, if your listeners, viewers want to look at the police report.
The police report is out there.
Yeah.
So to fast forward a little bit, the Palm Beach Police Department does an investigation into Epstein back in 2005. So almost 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
How does that investigation play out?
What happens is a 14-year-old girl tells her mother that she's been molested by Jeffrey Epstein. And the mother, I think it's her stepmother, takes her to the Palm Beach Police Department. And she identifies Epstein. She talks about his anatomy. She talks about his house. She talks about the interior of his house. So the Palm Beach Police Department, under Michael Ryder, he's the chief, they investigate for about a year. And they get the statements of 5 victims, and then they have statements of other people corroborating the victims, but they know of 17 other victims. So they know of 22 victims. And they were ready to they executed a search warrant on Epstein's home, and they were going to arrest him for 5 counts of child abuse. And I mean, they just thought it was a fait accompli that they were going to arrest him.
Yeah, done deal.
But that case got taken away from them and was given to a grand jury.
Okay.
And that grand jury concluded that Jeffrey Epstein hadn't molested a single child. Now, and one of the girls that was called, she'd been molested by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 14, and she was testifying when she was 16. And then there was another one that had been molested by Epstein since she was 16, and she was 18, but the last time I believe she had sex with Epstein was when she was 17. And the prosecutors calling these girls prostitutes.
The prosecutors, the special prosecutors are calling them to the stand and then basically calling them whores for getting molested by Epstein.
You can go to my website and I deconstruct that. The grand jury testimony came out some months ago, and I did a podcast on the grand jury. Just kind of deconstructing it. But this poor girl, I mean, she's 16 years old at the time, but she was molested by Epstein when she was 14. And a grand jury says, you know, what you did is wrong, right? You know, I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
And that is how much power special prosecutors have over grand jurors. Again,
who is overseeing that grand jury? This was back in 2005, 2006?
2006, yeah.
Who was overseeing that?
Her name is Layla Bolavlatic or something like it's a I think it's an Eastern German name. I always mispronounce it though.
Yeah, but she was the special prosecutor.
Yes, yeah.
Dressing down these girls on the stand.
No, she only called 2 girls.
2 girls.
Yeah. And then she called people in law enforcement that talked about the problems that the girls were having. Like that they'd been busted for marijuana or they'd been to rehab or stuff like that. As if, you know, getting molested by Jeffrey Epstein is going to help their mental health. I mean,
yeah,
the whole thing was insane.
It's crazy because, I mean, if you're the special prosecutor, you're supposed to be representing the state of Florida in a sense. So you're just trying to get to the bottom of it. But the approach that this woman, you know, Layla, was taking as the special prosecutor, it sounds like she was more of the defense attorney for Jeffrey Epstein than she was prosecuting the actual crimes that allegedly happened.
She had one agenda, and that was to make sure that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't there. Could you Google her name? It's bothering me. I cannot recall her name.
Let me,
Bella Lovic or something like that?
Special prosecutor Jeffrey Epstein. Layla. Let me see if that comes up.
I don't think it's Layla. It's Lana.
Lana
Belalovic or something like that. I can't.
Lana Belalovic.
Yeah.
Belalovic. Assistant State Attorney Lana Belalovic led the prosecution against Epstein during the 2006 grand jury proceedings.
I always have problems with Eastern European names. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
My mind doesn't.
Just one. I mean, they're tough. They've got a lot of syllables, a lot of consonants.
But this is troubling to me. Okay, you just expect guys to be dogs, to be perverts, or a lot of them. And most guys that I know, they've, acted like pigs, or a lot of the guys that I know have acted like pigs. I mean, you just kind of expect that guys are that way. But to see a woman cover up child sexual abuse, that hurts me more than to see guys do it. You would think that there was some kind of maternal instinct that would prevent them from being so corrupt when it comes to the molestation of children. But
I mean, there are dark forces out there regardless of gender. You'd think the same thing with Ghislaine Maxwell. How could a woman that was leading these girls to slaughter, how could you do that as a female to essentially, send them to get molested, to get taken advantage of repeatedly? scarring, trauma, all that shit that goes along with it. You wouldn't think that, especially a woman would be able to do that, but they're female pimps,
I know.
fucking doing dark shit, sitting on the throne.
But isn't it worse though when a woman does it? Do you think it just?
I don't know if it's worse because the result is the same, but you would almost think it might be slightly worse in the sense that if a let's say a girl is in Epstein's house or one of his compounds and she sees a woman walk in, you think that a girl would be able to connect with an older woman and there would be some sympathy, and you might think, oh, there's a way out of this. So in a sense, Ghislaine Maxwell walks in a room, you might have a sense of hope. And that does maybe make it a little bit worse to have that ripped out of you and realize she's also part of this. She is also a dark force working alongside Epstein.
Well, Epstein got some girls from South Africa, and he was doing a trip with Bill Clinton. And these women just thought that because he was with Bill Clinton, he was on the up and up. And one of them, Juliette Bryant, who is a very sweet woman. So they said, you're going to be a model. We'll fly you to New York. Bada bing. And so they flew her to New York. And then her first day in New York, she gets a call from one of Epstein's henchwomen, Sarah Kellen. And Sarah Kellen says, we're going to the island. And don't worry about packing stuff. We'll have clothes for you to wear.
How old is Juliette Bryant at this point?
She's probably 20.
Okay.
And then when they're 35,000 feet up, Epstein, right in front of all these girls, and Juliette Bryant has someone perform oral sex on him. So these girls know what kind of fate is awaiting them at the island. And
yeah, it's like a power play.
Well, Epstein's just showing them,
yeah,
this is going to be your fate.
So to go back to the 2006 grand jury, so Epstein gets let off on that. Then there's that's different from the sweetheart deal, right? Epstein eventually gets a deal, or is that part of it?
That is part of it. Okay.
That's part of it, okay.
What happens is Michael Ryder, who is a real hero in this story, he's the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department. He goes ballistic because they knew of 23 underage girls that had been molested. So he goes ballistic. And then the Justice Department jumps into the fray, and then Alexander Acosta, who is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, is going to impanel a grand jury, but then he is told that Epstein is intelligence and that he has to stand down.
Yeah.
Now, constitutionally, I believe that there are only two people that can tell a U.S. attorney to stand down. It's either got to come from the president or it's got to come from the attorney general. I mean, it can be delivered. The message can be delivered by a minion of the president or the attorney general. But for a U.S. attorney to stand down, to tell a U.S. attorney to stand down, that requires a tremendous amount of power.
Yeah.
And then that's when the sweetheart deal is made.
Okay. And then Acosta, I mean, I've seen this. I looked this up just to see for myself, but Acosta quite literally says, I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence. He was above my pay grade, which is another one of those wild things, like Tim Burchett saying, there are honeypots in Congress. You don't think the attorney general would come out and say, yeah, I was told to stand down. Epstein was actually associated with intelligence or, some operation behind the scenes.
And he has never denied saying that.
No, yeah, it's on record. He
I
couldn't.
mean,
Couldn't
no,
deny it. Yeah.
but people have questioned him about it, and he's never denied saying it.
Yeah.
So,
So the sweetheart deal, it's a weird agreement because it's a non-prosecution agreement,
okay,
which
what happens with that is, so the feds tell the state that really corrupt grand jury got Epstein on one count of adult pandering. And then the feds,
what is adult pandering, like prostitution or
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And then the feds said you've got to include one count of child abuse. So they included one count of child abuse. And he was looking at 20 years.
Hmm.
And he was given 18 months in the county jail, and he served 13 months. And he had his little wing dressed up like the Taj Mahal, and he was paying the people at the jail all kinds of money. I mean, it was...
Was this the same one where he was allowed to leave during the day,
and he could leave
and
during
he
the
just
day
had to sleep there at night?
Yeah, to molest. He could leave. Yeah, he was molesting girls while he was there. And with Epstein, at that point, then he just he gets out of jail and he just starts doing his thing again.
So how is Epstein choreographing his blackmail pedophile network? Is it similar to the Franklin scandal? How is that all coming together with Epstein? How's he sort of orchestrating that?
Okay, with Maria Farmer and Virginia Giuffre, all his homes were wired for audiovisual blackmail. Although Epstein knew that the Palm Beach Police Department was going to serve a search warrant on his home, he still didn't get rid of all the hidden cameras. And there were hidden cameras in his place in New Mexico. There were hidden cameras on the island. And then there were hidden cameras in his mansion on Fifth Avenue. And actually, earlier I talked about Spence and the room with the monitors. Epstein showed Maria Farmer, this is what Maria Farmer says, is that Epstein brought her in, and there were men, as in plural, looking at the monitors. And the monitors were all the bedrooms and all the bathrooms.
Really?
Yeah.
So there were just guys back there, either acting as security or producer, like, or maybe just to enjoy what they were seeing. Some combination of that, but Maria Farmer, and this is back in what, like 95 or 96 when she was reporting a lot of this. Like, it was one of the earliest cases. She walked into a room and saw guys just sitting there with screens and monitors. Two guys.
Yeah.
So when the FBI raids Epstein's compounds, places, place in New York, other places around the country, the island, there are thousands of nude photos. There are CDs, DVDs that likely have underage girls on them. Where are these tapes? Like, why are these tapes not being brought to light?
Well, because it's cover up. The FBI drilled his safe and got all those DVDs. And I think some of them were child pornography, and I also think some of them were compromise stuff. And it's funny, when Epstein died, the Fed said that that his case was closed. So I did a Freedom of Information Act request. I didn't want the DVDs. I wanted reports on the DVDs. And then I got an email from the feds saying that the case was ongoing. And then I tried it 6 months later, and the case was still ongoing. So he's been dead for a number of years, but the case is still ongoing.
Do you think the tapes still exist, or they've been destroyed?
I don't know.
If you could go back in time and witness the death of Jeffrey Epstein, what do you think you would see?
I mean, I think that he was given the same deal that Spence was given. You can either kill yourself or, we can help you. Vice called me and they wanted to interview me about Epstein's suicide. And I said to them, and I always say this on podcasts, that is a red herring. Epstein's.
No.
What the crime is the government covering up child trafficking, which means that the government is aiding and abetting child trafficking. And then we know who a bunch of the procurators are. We know who the perps are. That's what the media should be focusing on, not whether or not he killed himself. They should be focusing on why is our government aiding and abetting child trafficking, and why aren't these child molesters being brought to justice? That's what we need to focus on.
Yeah. So you think there is a chance that Epstein did take his own life as part of a deal similar to what Craig Spence was offered?
Yeah, I mean, that's entirely within the realm of reality.
Yeah. But yeah, it is. I do agree with you in the sense that whenever you see Epstein covered in the media, it's usually very surface level, and it's the most scandalous details of things that are going on, whether, it's Bill Clinton on a flight 27 times or with Les Wexner, but it never goes any deeper to incriminate someone or ask questions that would lead to a direct link, a direct incrimination.
Justice. No mainstream media has screamed for justice. I mean, that shows you that our mainstream media is being run by ethical eunuchs.
Yeah. Why is Ghislaine Maxwell still alive?
The reason why Ghislaine Maxwell is still alive is the reason why Lawrence King is still alive. I'm sure that she had the talk. Ghislaine, you saw what happened to Jeffrey. Now, you can keep your mouth shut. We'll take care of you. And when you get out, you'll have lots of money. But you're going to have to do some time. And she's doing time, but she's already in a dormitory. I mean, she's already in the cushest of the cush.
Yeah.
And usually prisoners that are in dormitories have done a lot of time, and they've been exemplary prisoners, and they're getting ready to be released. Those are usually the people that end up in dormitories. She was in a dormitory after less than 2 years, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, would it surprise you if she was released anytime soon?
She appealed. There was the non-prosecution agreement.
Yeah.
Which, so the feds worked that out with Epstein. Is the non-prosecution agreement basically said that Jeffrey Epstein will compensate his victims and that no one affiliated with Jeffrey Epstein will be brought to justice.
And that's the Epstein compensation fund. That's part of the deal.
The Epstein, eventually there was the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, which is very corrupt. We can get into that later if you'd like.
Yeah, we can get into it now. How is the compensation fund corrupt?
Okay, so Jeffrey Epstein trafficked girls for 25 years, and only 225 women have come forward. And the two people that are essentially in charge of the fund, that have created the criteria for the fund, are Jordana Feldman, and she played an integral role in the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund, and David Boies, one of the attorneys that's represented a bunch of girls. And David Boies is dirty, man. He's a dirty dude.
How so?
He represented Harvey Weinstein. There's a group of Israeli former Mossad mercenaries called Black Cube, and they do dirty deeds. They're not dirt cheap, but they're definitely dirty deeds. the New York Times was going to publish an article about Weinstein, and he sicked Black Cube on their reporters. And then Rose McGowan was one of the first actresses to come forward, and he sicked Black Cube on her. And then Elizabeth Holmes, the grifter from Theranos. Boys was on the board, and people started to realize, whoa, Elizabeth Holmes is a grifter. He sicked Black Cube on them, too. And then he brought in definitely a CIA asset named Stan Pottinger. And Pottinger was an associate attorney general, and he covered up a number of things. Well, he was an associate attorney general. He covered up Kent State, where those 4 kids were murdered. He covered up the death of Martin Luther King. He covered up he tried to cover up Wounded Knee, which is when a number of people, when the American Indian movement occupied Wounded Knee, where that massacre had occurred. And then the judge found that he and the FBI had told too many lies, so he dismissed that. But and he was actually a partner of Gloria Steinem, and Steinem was a CIA asset. Now, Steinem said that she was a CIA asset from 1959 to 1961, but I've got an article from a feminist magazine in San Francisco that said that she was a CIA asset through most of the 60s. But anyway, Pottinger has covered up all these things. And then he gets out of the government after recovering, and he covered up COINTELPRO, which was the spine of... that
was like reading people's mail.
All kinds of stuff.
Breaking into people's property, taking information.
Tapping their phone, everything. He covered that up. He covered up so much stuff. But then when he got... when he left the government, he thought, well, I need to make some money, so I'm going to be a criminal. And at the time that I'm talking about, the Iranians under Ayatollah Khomeini had taken the American hostages at the embassy. And Pottinger was working with 2 Iranians, telling them how to do arms deals. So there wouldn't be any problems. So there wouldn't be any blowback. This is treason. I mean,
he was showing or telling the Iranians how to smuggle arms.
Yes.
Into Iran?
Yes, into Iran. And we're essentially at war with Iran. I mean, this is treason. And that paragon of integrity, Rudolph Giuliani, was overseeing the case. And this is like this is actually mind-boggling. It's right up there with Les Wexner saying he's lonely. So they're recording Stan Pottinger with these 2 Iranians, and he's teaching them how to do the deals. And the 2 Iranians get indicted, but Rudolph Giuliani in the Department of Justice loses the tapes.
With Pottinger.
With Pottinger on them. Yeah, loses the tape. I mean, you would think that they would maybe get him off on a technicality or something like that. But no, they lost the tapes.
How do we know about the tapes if they were lost? Was there a transcript or something? Or
I mean,
they were just spoken about?
I'm pulling articles from that's from the Washington Post.
Okay.
Which is about as straightforward as you can get. So Pottinger walked from that. And then this is the guy that David Boies brings in to litigate for the Victims' Compensation Fund. So you have an intelligence op covering up an intelligence op. And another thing about the victim, so 225 women applied, 150 women were awarded compensation. 8 didn't take the deal, and 142 did. But if you get money from this the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, that's it. you cannot go after any other perpetrators.
Really?
You sign away your ability to go after perpetrators.
So you say, you know, I'll take the check,
Yes.
but I can no longer take legal action against
Any-
Epstein or any one of his cohorts, anyone related.
Any of his perpetrators.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Seems pretty fucked up for a victim fund.
that it's totally fucked up, and I'll tell you some more stuff.
Yeah.
But so that victims fund is keeping those women quiet, is doing something that the government couldn't do. It's making those victims mute about about their other perps. Now, I've been at writing about child trafficking for 22 years. And I've spoken, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has international summit every year. I've spoken at 3 of those. I've spoken at other international conferences. I contributed a chapter to a book on, the chapter I wrote was about child trafficking, but it was, the editors were from the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. And 2 of them were psychiatrists, one was a psychologist. So there have been some people in the anti-trafficking movement or who work with victims that have embraced my work. And I know a psychologist. She's an eminent psychologist. I mean, she's been on television quite a bit. She had a client who she believes was trafficked when she was under the age of 10 by Epstein. And she was able to describe Epstein's home and a number of other things. And she was denied compensation. And then I know another therapist who also, and she's an esteemed therapist too, she also had a client that she felt was trafficked by Epstein under the age of 10. And both of them applied for compensation, and neither one of them got any money. Because the cover story on Epstein is the youngest one is 14.
Yeah. As if that's some sort of moral standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
14 years old will compensate. Anything below that, you're on your own.
Yeah. I mean, it's really sick. I mean, and why isn't the media talking about this? I mean.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's crazy. Like you were saying before, that everything is surface level and salacious, but no one is actually digging into the things that could lead to justice, retribution, and penalty for the people who were orchestrating this whole thing.
It's really unfortunate.
So we've gone through a lot of the connections between the Franklin scandal and Epstein. And William Barr was, you've said, the nexus between those two. For Diddy, it seems that, and you've covered this extensively, that the nexus between Epstein and Diddy is Damien Williams.
Yes.
Talk about Damien Williams and his connection to Epstein and Diddy. Okay,
Damien Williams is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He's considered the most powerful federal law enforcement agents in the city, and he was part of the Clinton machine. And then he was given Soros's brother Paul has a fund, the Paul and Daisy Soros Fund, where Damien Williams' parents were from Jamaica, so he's first generation, and they give sizable grants, like $90,000. Yeah. They gave him $90,000 to go through Yale Law School.
Oh, wow.
And Peter Soros is on the board of the the Paul and Daisy Soros Foundation because he's their son. And he's circled twice in Epstein's Black Book.
Maybe the second circle cancels out the first one. Maybe he's saying, all right, he's a bad guy with one circle. Actually, I messed up. He's actually a good guy.
So this is either a very bizarre coincidence or it's very honest. But Damien Williams was the guy that choreographed the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. There were only 4 victims called, and those 4 victims had only been molested by Epstein and Maxwell. So they knew nothing about the other perps. It was very, very carefully choreographed. And he is the one that called the grand jury for P. Diddy. And P. Diddy has been indicted on 3 counts. Now, P. Diddy, there's 2 of the lawsuits against him. Well, there's a new wave of lawsuits, but there was the first 8. 2 of them were minors when they say that P. Diddy had molested them. And then there was Little Rod, who's a hip hop producer, and he said that Diddy was trafficking children all the time. And he also talked about the hidden cameras, and then there's a Homeland Security officer that under anonymity has talked about the hidden cameras. And so we have kind of and then there are other people that have talked about Diddy's propensity for blackmail. And with Damien Williams, so Maxwell was indicted on all these conspiracies, but nobody else was indicted. Diddy is indicted on conspiracy, but no one else is indicted. And Williams isn't going after him for trafficking children. I mean, it's also a corrupt grand jury. And I was saying that, well, that grand jury started to wend in, or was impaneled in May. And I've been saying Diddy is going to get indicted on something, and then maybe one of his kids or something. But I was wrong. I mean, he's the only guy that's getting indicted. Yeah. So Damien Williams is the nexus between the Epstein cover-up and then now it's the P. Diddy cover-up.
So Diddy comes from an interesting background too, because he doesn't come from money, just like King and Spence and Epstein. I think his dad was a drug dealer, ended up getting killed, murdered. Diddy works his way into the music industry. Obviously, he's credited with discovering Notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls, Usher, killing it. Where do you think Diddy starts to stray? Where do you think he gets involved in the, molestation? He's also had cameras in his house. There was footage recorded or recovered of allegedly him filming these freak offs, having audiovisual blackmail like Epstein and Franklin scandal. Where do you think he starts to stray, Diddy, to get into this whole underworld?
Okay. In 1993, he and Clive Davis formed Bad Boy Records. Now, Clive Davis is a dirty, dirty guy. He's launched a career of a lot of rock stars, and he's ripped a lot of people off. But he's been indicted 3 times for filing cooked tax returns. He's been busted 3 times for defrauding the IRS. It's against the law for record companies to give radio stations or DJs money. It's called payola. It's against the law. He has been busted for the largest payola scam of all time. And these are just the things that we know about. There was a Genovese guy named Pasquale Falcone who was smuggling heroin into the United States, and he got busted. And then the feds started digging into Falcone, and then they came all across all these shell companies that Davis had set up with Falcone, and Davis was president of CBS Records, so he was funneling money from CBS Records to these shell companies, and him and Falcone were splitting it up. And this is the criminality that we know about the guy. And you know how many days he spent in jail for everything that I've just told you?
How many?
Not one.
So he's got the payola scandal, 3 tax fraud violations, and the shell companies with the heroin guy, Genovese crime family.
Yeah. Now,
I mean, he's rich though, right? So he knows how to skirt shit. I feel like rich people, business execs, they always find a way to do something behind the scenes, settlements to avoid jail time.
it all depends on the kind of deal that they're willing to make with the feds. It all depends upon that.
So,
but that's my
Clive Davis is the connection you think to Diddy, sort of flipping into that sort of shit.
That's what I believe.
Do you think there's a case for Diddy being an intelligence asset?
Well, okay, Diddy. Okay, given his association with Clive Davis and all the stuff that he's gotten away with over the years. And he hasn't spent a day in jail. So
not yet. We'll see what happens with
well, now he's in jail under suicide watch.
Yeah.
But with the hidden cameras, the thing about blackmail artists, Spence started having a lot of media on him. And he was no longer good as a blackmail artist because you've got to be kind of anonymous if you're a blackmailer. Epstein started to have a lot of media on him because it was coming out what he was doing. And lawsuits were being filed against P. Diddy. As of March last year, there were 8 lawsuits. Now there's a whole wave of lawsuits. And 25 of them are minors. So P. Diddy has been molesting children for a very long time without any problems. But these lawsuits that started to get generated, they started, I believe, with Cassie Ventura, that started to get generated, put a lot of media on him. And again, you're not going to be a successful blackmailer if you have a lot of media on you because people are going to just stay away from you. They know what to expect.
So these dark, malignant corners of society, as you've said, these black organizations that may be connected to intelligence, maybe intelligence doesn't, it doesn't even know about them or just chooses not to engage with them.
No, it's part of it.
You think it's part of intelligence?
Yeah.
Okay, so these organizations, dark organizations that are either part of or associated with intelligence, they are sort of like the deep state in the sense that they remain around, but they just pick different faces. Like, looks like Diddy may have been one of them, Epstein, Lawrence King, Craig Spence. Those are the disposables. Now that those people are gone, they're going to be searching for someone else if they haven't already found someone to sort of take the reins of that sort of blackmail.
There's a lot of networks operating right now. And I was told that there was an Epstein understudy. I was never able to get his name, but I've been told that there was an Epstein understudy.
Yeah. It makes sense if you have someone that could be taken out at any moment or that can go to jail and be given the choice to kill themselves or not, like Spence and Epstein, some evidence for that they were essentially given this choice that you would want to have a backup to take over the responsibility of the blackmail front when things go awry.
I don't think that there's a shortage of pedophiles in the country.
It doesn't seem like it.
That would be willing to make that deal.
Yeah.
If you look at just in our country, according to the Centers for Disease Control, and these are relatively conservative numbers, 25% of underage girls have been molested and 5% of underage boys. That's 50 million Americans have been molested. So there's a lot of pedophiles out there. And there's a lot of people that have been damaged by pedophiles. And we're never going to be able to eradicate child abuse. We're not going to be able to do that. But we can certainly make sure that our government is no longer taking part in it as covering it up. I mean, we got to at least go that far as a society.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so if you're that dark organization, you're either it seems like you'd either be testing people out to see, do we have someone here who's willing to engage in pedophilia? If so, they'll slip up at some point, or they're just waiting for someone to get caught, and then they approach them and say, "We'll keep this out of the headlines. We'll keep you out of jail. We know what you're about. Maybe you're even married, you have kids, but like you're secretly going, off and fucking kids." And they essentially, it sounds like they come to you and say, you can do this as much as you want now, but you just have to also do audio visual blackmail for us with the people that you're engaging with.
And we're talking about guys that are psychopaths. King was a psychopath. Epstein was a psychopath. Diddy's a psychopath. They're all psychopaths.
Yeah. There was also an interesting connection between Diddy and Epstein, which was the security guard, or one of the heads of security for Epstein.
Fahim Mohammed. Well, actually, he was head of security for Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson, that was it.
And now there's a guy that's sitting on a lot of secrets, and now he's a security for, or was doing security for Diddy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Is there anyone from either the Franklin scandal, Epstein, or Diddy that you want to talk to who you haven't been able to talk to yet?
There's definitely some people involved with Epstein that I'd like to talk to, and there's people involved with Diddy that I'd like to talk to.
Can you say specifically who you'd want to pick their brains if you got the chance?
People that were privy to what he was up to. Now, chances are they're not going to talk. I had a lot of success with the Franklin scandal, but it took me 7 years of just kind of like the ocean, just the waves, the waves.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, there isn't any specific names. I mean, I'd love to get Stan Ponger to talk.
Yeah.
Or David Boies to talk, but they will never, ever talk to Nick Bryant. Actually, I was going to interview Boies at one point, and he pulled the plug on
it. Would it be, so obviously in your line of work, you want to be able to interview people who have done shady things, but your name is out there now. Is it illegal for you to say, I'm not, basically give a fake name, I'm a small-time journalist somewhere, and do an interview? Would you be able to use that interview?
I would never lie like that.
Okay.
I would never lie like that. Evil protects itself through two ways. Evil protects itself through lies, and evil protects itself through viciousness. And people don't want to believe that other people are that vicious. So when evil lies about it, people want to believe that. They don't want to deal with the cognitive dissonance. And if I was lying, when I embarked on the Franklin scandal, I decided I wasn't going to lie to get information, because then I would be playing in evil's court. And I just decided that I wouldn't do that.
Also easier to discredit if people can point to lies, and they can say, well, what else is a lie?
Like there's someone who I wanted to get their number. And you can call the electric company or the gas company and say, there's something going on with my gas, and could you guys call me? Do you have my number, just to make sure before you send some people out? You can go that route.
Yeah, there are ways to get around it
to get numbers, but I decided I wasn't going to do that.
Is there anything that we're missing with Diddy, Epstein, Franklin scandal, and anything that you'd want to bring up
The only thing is, I would suggest that your viewers and listeners go to EpsteinJustice.com. We're trying to make a difference, and we're going to make a difference. And if your viewers take a look at our website, look at what we've done, and because this has to, we've got to stop this. I mean, the government shouldn't be in the business of aiding and abetting child trafficking. I mean, that's just something that we need to stop it as a society.
I will link Epstein Justice for everyone who's listening and watching to go check that out. Where's the best place for people to follow your work as Nick Bryant?
NickBryantNYC.com is my website, and Nick_Bryant is my Twitter handle. And then I also have the Nick Bryant podcast.
Well, Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.